Yeah, welcome back to the Sea Files, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And in this, I'm reading The Battle for Christmas by Stefan Nissenbaum. It's a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Really good book. Cultural history of America's most cherished holiday. So it's history of Christmas in the United States. The history might surprise a lot of you if you go back from the beginning and go through it. Um, And I'm on page 169, and I should be able to finish up chapter 4 in this particular reading. And I'm going to do more. I think what I'm going to go to next, I had a gift uh, of On the Christian Life, a new translation by John Calvin. It's a fairly short book. I think this is the next one I will read after I finish this one. This one should be done before the end of February, I hope. And then I have a one after that, Heaven Misplaced, Christ's Kingdom on Earth by Douglas Wilson. I think that's the one I'll do after I do this little section by John Calvin. This one takes a section out of the Institutes on the Christian Religion by John Calvin. It's a little section on how to live the Christian life. And I'll be doing that one next. I have the institutes behind me, but my goodness, I tell you right now, if I started reading the entire institutes, I think the Lord would be taking me home by the time I finish them. It's thick. It is really thick. So anyway, let's get started on 169. And this is Santa Claus and the Mystification of Consumption. So we're getting into how the commercialization of Christmas came about. And so far in this book, uh, and I'll just give it to you, Christmas has not been about Christ at any point in the history, all the way up to the 1800s. In the 1600s, the Puritans rejected Christmas because of what it was. It didn't have anything to do with Christ. It was more like a holiday like Halloween and New Year's combined together, how they celebrated it. So I hope I get up to the point where it starts to morph into a holiday that celebrates Christ. I'm curious as to when that comes in. All right. Santa Claus as commercial icon. It was a figure of Santa Claus that permitted the Sedgwicks and many other Americans to enter the world of commercial gift giving so quickly and completely. As early as the mid 1820s, Santa Claus was beginning to be employed to sell Christmas goods, like these Macy Santas and things like that, out of the 1950s movies and stuff. The first such usage I have encountered comes from the proprietor of a New York jewelry shop in the form of an advertising flyer composed in elaborate verse form. The scene is set on Christmas Eve. Shops were generally open then, and often on the morning of Christmas Day itself. The narrator is a prospective customer seeking a present for a lady friend. And as I priced a pen, which caught my raptured eye, St. Nicholas came in. He instantly commenced selecting trinkets rare as Christmas complaints from lovers to the fair. He rummaged every shelf, the choicest gems to buy. I saw the saint myself. What will you lay? Bet it's a lie. But it was during the early 1840s that Santa Claus became a common commercial icon, a figure used by merchants to attract the attention of children to a particular shop. Santa Claus was barely 20 years old by then, and I find that funny. He was barely 20 years old by then, And he had been a figure of national scope for fewer than 15 years. In fact, the first popular visual image of Santa Claus was published in 1841 in a New York paper. But in 1842, that very picture was appropriated by a shop in Albany, which used it as part of a newspaper advertisement. The picture, in double column, was labeled Santa Claus in the act himself with fancy article. Whoop, I skipped the line. Here we try it again. Rewind. Take two. The picture in double column was labeled Santa Claus in the act of descending a chimney to fill the children's stockings after supplying himself with fancy articles. At Peace's Great Variety Store, number 50 Broadway, Albany. 3 years later, the same picture was being used to accompany the ad of a confectioner's in Cincinnati. I don't know if you can see these pictures. Can you see that? Some little, that's what Santa Claus used to look like, folks. And there he is getting ready to go down a chimney. Quite different than the way he's pictured today. Um, and those pictures are from 1841. This handsome woodcut from 1841 was the first visual representation of St. Nicholas to be widely distributed. An early picture had appeared in 1830 in the Troy Sentinel, the same newspaper in which Clement Moore's poem was first appeared. Brother Jonathan, into whose chimney this Santa is about to descend, was a weekly New York paper. According to the caption, the scene is set on New Year's Eve. Right. Now, back in 1841, a shopkeeper, I think I'm about to repeat what was in the caption on the picture. All right, that's fine. Back in 1841, a shopkeeper in Philadelphia managed to attract thousands of children to a shop by adding a life-size model of Santa Claus that was apparently based on that same picture. One newspaper reported the delight this figure caused among youthful passers-by, much as our young readers have heard or imagined of this worthy character as the bountiful patron of good children on Christmas Eve. They probably never expected to behold the real personage in the very act of descending a chimney, as our friend Parkinson has shown him over his well-thronged shop door in Chestnut Street. He was decidedly the attraction yesterday and last evening, and monopolized more than his share of the attention of the young folks, which is usually bestowed with undivided attention on the bonbons in the windows. Another local paper flashed out the picture, noting that his hand was full of toys and his face covered with a broad smile, just that benevolent expression that those who love children ever wear. In fact, oh, okay. Let me okay, here's what's happening. The next page just goes into the picture with all of that explanation. You can't see it. I'll come back to that. In fact, the figure was so lifelike that no lad who sees it will ever after accuse pa or ma of being the Kris Kringle who filled his stocking. That such a person exists will be most indelibly fixed upon their memories. Lying to the kids. Oh, did I say that openly on? Oh, sorry. Okay. All you guys that get mad when somebody says that Santa Claus is not real. All right, commercial Santa. In 1841, this is on the caption, the pictures. So that's this picture right here. Come on, right there, right there. Look how look at his chin. How A different chin than the modern Santa, I'll tell you that. I can't get the other picture going very well, but you kind of get a picture there. So this is saying, in 1842, just a year after the publication of the woodcut shown opposite, the picture was appropriated for commercial purposes by an Albany merchant named Peace, Pease, whose name and address have been added to the bottom of the sack of toys that Santa is carrying on his back. 2 years later, a newspaper in Cincinnati carried a redrawn version of the same picture at the left. So the left one's the one I couldn't really give you that well, but it's basically the same picture, just kind of sideways. Let's see, which was printed sideways simply because the merchant in question had to pay for only a single column advertisement. So he couldn't afford the picture right up, the right way up. The text of his advertisement read in part, "Come at last, important arrival. The little people of this big city will doubtless be rejoiced to learn that the starling old Dutchman, Santa Claus, has just arrived from the renowned regions of the Manhattoes with his usual annual budget of knickknacks for the Christmas times. Look upon his back and shoulders, and you will get some idea of the curiosities and niceties that he has brought out this year. And in addition to all these, he has some altogether superior hidden in his wallet, not to be seen till day before Christmas. The old gentleman has taken up his headquarters this year at Lauterbeck's on 4th Street between Main and Sycamore." Some things never change, huh? Actually, this changed a lot. The whole concept of Christmas through the history of Christmas in America, there was a lot of changes over time. So this is Santa Claus as anti-commercial icon. So we went going from commercial to anti-commercial. All right. Accusing Pa or Ma of being Kris Kringle. From the beginning, it seems parents found it difficult to convince their children that it was truly Santa Claus who brought their presents. I remember when I was a kid putting out cookies and milk for Santa Claus. And the next morning, the plate would be there, the cookies would have been eaten, the milk was drank. And I got older and figured out, geez, my parents took real advantage of that. Because I didn't get any of those cookies. They ate the cookies. That's cheating, man, right there. That's just cheating. Of course, today I don't eat cookies because I have a strict diet. Um, but what matters, let's see, but what matters just as much is that then as now, they found it necessary to work so hard to do just that. What was it that made the pretense so important? Why did parents need to pretend that Santa Claus was real and to deny that their presents really came from family members themselves? That's a good question. The answer is that Santa Claus had an extraordinary ability, in spite of his early commercialization, to disguise the fact that most of the presents he bought were commodity productions. Okay. Like other Americans, writers, editors, and advertisers in the second quarter of the 19th century like to pretend, or even believe, as most Americans nowadays continue to do, that Santa Claus represented an old-fashioned Christmas, a ritual so old that it was, in essence, beyond history, and thus outside the commercial marketplace. Of course, he's really brand spanking new. The earlier one said he was just 20 years old, yet he's old as the hills and old as the eternity itself, right? We now know that this was mostly a myth, you think, and that Santa Claus was all but invented in the early 19th century, and that the world of 17, I'm sorry, and that the world of 17th century Holland, in which he had previously appeared, was itself prosperous and highly commercialized. But the very people who chose to adopt the Santa Claus ritual from the 1820s on were willing to believe that he was a figure of great antiquity and that introducing him into their households, they were carrying on an authentic, ancient, and unchanging Dutch folk tradition. So even today, people will say, "Oh, it comes from the old Dutch traditions." Not so old. That was what they read year after year in the newspapers and magazines. So if you repeat a lie enough times, people will believe it, right? Such people knew, in one way, of course, that Santa Claus was not real, but in another way, they did believe in his reality as a figure who stood above mere history. In that sense, it was adults who needed to believe in Santa Claus. Okay. And if Santa Claus was new in the 1820s and 30s, so too was the ideology of domesticity, of what? Of domesticity itself, by virtue of which he entered so many American households. Domestic ideology placed children at the very center of family life and assumed that families existed more to provide emotional gratification than to engage in economic production. In one sense, of course, it is true to say that the new domestic Christmas was an expression of that new ideology, a veritable celebration of domesticity. Why do they put words in that I can't pronounce? Okay, here we go. But the obverse is true as well. Speaking some fancy language here. The averse is true as well. The opposite. The new domestic Christmas also helped to create that ideology. Even more than today, did I say that too quick? Even more than today, the exchange of Christmas gifts in the 1820s and 30s was a ritual gesture intended to generate the sense that sincere expressions of domestic intimacy were more important than matters of money and business. That was a heavy burden to place on Christmas presents, especially since most of them were produced, advertised, and sold as mass market commodities. In other words, they were not individually homemade. There was a bunch of them. There's like assembly line type items. The personal feelings that Christmas presents were intended to engender actually hinge on the process that enmeshed those presents in some commercial nexus that the gift exchange promised to transcend. I'll read it again. The personal feelings that Christmas presents were intended to engender actually hinged on a process that enmeshed those presents in the same commercial nexus that the gift exchange promised to transcend. That might make a little more sense. The result was one of the most basic internal contradictions of our modern world. Marketplace commodities were given the job of generating intense and intensely private emotions. It should not be surprising, then, that the 19th century Americans who began to celebrate the new domestic Christmas needed just as much as our own generation to believe that the holiday gift exchange was rooted in something deeper and more authentic than the dynamics of the marketplace. To do their job, Christmas presents had to be obfuscated. I put a word in there that's not there. To do their job, Christmas presents had to obfuscate their commercial origins. Some presents, gift books and Bibles, for example, or for instance, had their own ways of accomplishing that. And for other presents, the practice of gift wrapping could be an effective technique. One newspaper tried an appeal to ancient history, claiming that even Greek and Roman babies had been given expensive toys by their parents so that it was necessary to think of fancy commercial presents as a recent invention, a raw product of the modern economy. They were burnished by the sands of antiquity. Man, these marketers, boy, they just make stuff up. We'll make it up and sell what we want to sell. But it was Santa Claus who was able to provide this kind of reassurance best of all. Santa was even more effective than ancient history. He stood outside history. Do you see how effective marketing is? The psychological effects of marketing? There's a real psychology to it. It's incredible. And from a parent's perspective, the mystery of St. Nicholas effectively short circuited any childish queries about where all the presents came from. We might say that Santa became an anti commercial symbol at the very moment he was used for commercial purposes. Better yet, we might say that it was precisely because he was such an effective anti commercial icon that he could become such an effective. Oh, let me go back. I skipped a bunch of lines. We might, my eyes must be getting tired, folks. I'm sorry. We might say that Santa became an anti commercial symbol at the very get some light on the subject. At the very moment he was used for commercial purposes. Better yet, we might say that it was precisely because he was an effective anti-commercial icon that he became such an effective commercial icon. The two roles were quite compatible with each other. In fact, they were different sides of the same coin. Both the commercial and the anti-commercial Santa were functions of the new domestic Christmas, whether you like it or not. Here they stand in glaring contrast to another Santa Claus, the carnival Santa, explored in chapter 3, that whoreson who bousted and flirted with the girls, and with whom the domestic Santa Claus was not comfortable at all. So here's Santa at his workshop. That's an old picture of Santa right there. And that says Santa's Workshop. This picture was one of several colored illustrations that Thomas Nast prepared for book-length editions of A Visit from Saint Nick or Saint Nicholas. Notice the Santa's Workshop contains only hand tools and no machinery. This picture appeared in 1869. Another Nast portrayal of Santa's Workshop from the early 1870s shows the old fella using needle and thread to make a hand-sewn stocking at a time when almost every middle-class household had a sewing machine. The domestic Santa did the job in several different ways. His old Dutch origin was one of those, of course. The very fact that the Santa Claus ritual could be seen as ancient and unchanging offered a powerful symbolic link to an early and seemingly non-commercialized folk culture. Just as important were the actual details of the Santa Claus ritual itself. To begin with, the presents came from Santa Claus, not from parents, and therefore not from shops. Santa meditated magically between parent and child, between the buyer and the recipient of the gifts. His presence was what took the gift out of the realm of commercial in the eyes of parents, perhaps as well as children. To phrase this in a more contemporary fashion, we might say that Santa mystified consumption. He also mystified production and distribution. One of the great mysteries of Santa Claus was that he managed to provide presents for all children everywhere. A feat which, okay, we won't get into that. And he made them all himself. He was the producer of his own gifts. The elves had not shown up yet, apparently. Finally, of course, he was a distributor who managed to disperse his parent. I'm sorry, a distributor who managed to disperse his presence one house at a time. How Santa managed to do this was often the first skeptical question that children asked, usually after logic or math class, I would venture to say, but that he did so, and that the how of it all is a great mystery. Must be a part of the parents' answer. No, it's just magic. And Santa's presents are as good as handmade. I was going to say homemade. And Santa's presents are as good as handmade. Clement Clarke Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, never described the actual manufacture of Santa's presents, nor did the structure of the poem leave any space in the text that would invite professional illustrators to do so. But illustrators found the room anyway. Beginning in the late 1860s, the most popular illustrated editions of A Visit from St. Nicholas began to provide pictures of Santa's workshop. Pictures that always presented it as a place of household production, where only old-fashioned hand tools were in evidence. Even though this was a very apogee of the Industrial Revolution, Santa's workshop was never violated by the presence of machinery. In short, Santa Claus managed to reconcile opposites. He customized mass production. He maintained a personalized relationship with his enormous mass market. After all, his clientele was all but universal. And he did it all from motives that were in no way entrepreneurial. Santa Claus magically combined what in reality had now become a series of separate roles. He was simultaneously the gifts producer, distributor, seller, purchaser, and giver. In a new age of commodity production, what Santa Claus was able to offer, what he offered to grown-ups, was the moral equivalency or the moral equivalent of a world that had never wholly existed in the first place. It was the fading world of the household economy. Wow. That's the end of chapter 4 and right on time. Chapter 5, Under the Christmas Tree, A Battle of Generations. Now he does eventually get into Christ for the Christians, my fellow Christians who are wondering. Future chapters, we're in chapter 5. Well, we're going to be in chapter 5. Under the Christmas Tree, A Battle of Generations. Then there's Tiny Tim and Other Charity Cases. So that's where um, Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol will come into that chapter. And then finally, Wassailing Across the Color Line, Christmas in the Antebellum South. And then there's Epilogue, The Ghost of Christmas Past. So I imagine in chapter 6, we'll hear that's probably where more of the Christian aspect of Christmas will begin to come in. So we'll have to wait and see. I don't know. I haven't read that part yet. Okay, fun book. Um, so hope this has been enjoyable for you guys. The few of you who actually listen to this, why do I do this? Simply for this. It holds me accountable to finish the book. I've had a bad habit of starting a book, getting distracted, starting another book, getting distracted, and not finishing books. I do finish a lot of books, but some I don't finish. This holds me accountable to finish the book. Also, it allows me to share the book with you guys. And the fact that it's broken up into all the different videos helps me to avoid any copyright issues. I do tell you what the book is. Tell you can go and buy the book and read it. I'm kind of promoting the book, so hopefully that doesn't cause any copyright problems. I'm promoting the book. I'm helping the author out and selling the book literally by doing these videos. So hopefully that's satisfactory. Anyway, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time here on the C Files.